While touring the Union Pacific system in the 1870s, the company's president, Sidney Dillon, entered a railroad station in Utah to send a telegram. He was flabbergasted at what he saw. "A female telegrapher?" he exclaimed incredulously. The day was full of surprises. As he went from station to station, he found that the agent in most of them was a young woman, each holding the highest recommendation from the local railroad officials. This story is anecdotal. There's no way to know if it's exaggerated or if it's even true at all. What is accurate is that the majority of railroad stations in Utah in the 1870s through the 1880s were staffed by women. Railroading was, and still is, a male-dominated industry, more so then, and this was highly unusual. Travelers from the East regularly commented with surprise that not only did these women occupy skilled, well-paying technical positions, but they were also good at it. Even many of the telegraphy examiners and system inspectors on the Deseret Telegraph Company, which shared pole lines with the Utah Central and Utah Southern railroads, were women. This was not the case in the beginning. When the Deseret Telegraph Company established a telegraphy school in Salt Lake City, only one woman enrolled in the first class. Before the Transcontinental Railroad arrived in 1869, the telegraph stations were established in the homes of local ecclesiastical leaders. Their wives and daughters picked up Morse code and soon filled the positions of telegraph agents, forming a social network that provided a sense of connection in the isolated rural communities. Once the railroad arrived, many of the telegraph offices moved out of homes and into the railroad stations, and the woman went with them. The first Deseret Telegraph office in Lehi, Utah, was placed in the home of Bishop David Evans in 1870. His daughter, Barbara Evans, became the agent. In May 1872, the Lehi agency was not receiving nor sending enough telegrams to justify its operations, so it was closed. Barbara was then hired by the Utah Central Railroad to serve as station agent in Farmington. She was issued a set of telegraph instruments, a red flag, a red lantern, and a set of telegraph and train order blanks. She spent only 4 months in Farmington. By September 1872, the Utah Southern Railroad, which was building south from Salt Lake City, reached Lehi. Eager to return to her hometown, Barbara transferred to the Utah Southern, becoming the Lehi station agent. The Utah Southern depot that she worked at still stands and is now part of a museum. Barbara was replaced at Farmington by her friend Elizabeth Cowley. Elizabeth spent 3 years in railroad service, leaving in November 1875. She and Barbara remained good friends despite the distance between Farmington and Lehi, regularly sending each other telegrams in between trains, and at one point even posing together at a studio for a portrait. When Elizabeth resigned, she was replaced by Emma Jane Allman. Emma Jane transferred to the Utah Central from the Utah Southern Railroad's depot at Provo. While working in Farmington, she dated a gentleman, but her father did not approve of the relationship. So she broke it off and returned to Provo in 1878, where she married another man and tragically died in childbirth soon after. Elizabeth's replacement was Mary Ann Layton. Mary Ann's father was the namesake of the city of Layton, Utah, just north of Farmington. When not working at the station, Mary Ann taught Morse code to her younger sister, Annie Barnes Layton. At age 15, Annie took the telegraphy examination and was hired by the Utah Central Railroad to manage the Woods Cross Depot in October of 1879. The station agent was responsible for sending and receiving private telegrams, as well as reporting train arrivals and departures to the dispatcher, and writing train orders for the engine crews. The safe and reliable operation of the railroad depended on their work. The day started at 8 a.m. and ended whenever the last train passed their station. According to Annie Layton, the trains were often late, so she regularly worked 12-hour days. In between trains, however, the agents could slip away for social activity. One day, Annie walked to the nearby ball field to watch a baseball game, where she was distracted until realizing too late that she had missed the passenger train's scheduled arrival. She sheepishly ran back to the depot where the conductor and a crowd of angry passengers were waiting. She took the telegrams the passengers wanted to send, sold the tickets, and then telegraphed the dispatcher to report the train's departure 15 minutes late. The dispatcher asked what the reason was for the delay, and Annie answered truthfully, expecting to be fired on the spot. The dispatcher simply responded, "All right, but don't ever let it happen again." The private telegrams were a particular frustration for her. In later years, she recalled, "In those days, you could send 10 words in a telegram for a flat charge instead of the 15 words now permitted. When the train stopped at Woods Cross, passengers would run to the telegraph office, write their telegrams, pay the flat rate, and rush back to the cars. I didn't have time to count the words until the trains had gone. Then I had to do a lot of condensing. but I never omitted the essentials. Strong windstorms are an annual feature of the towns north of Salt Lake City, and one day the storm blew an entire train off the tracks between Farmington and Woods Cross. Annie spent 18 hours at her post managing the train orders to keep the railroad operating between the wrecking trains cleaning up the mess and the scheduled trains running around the scene of the accident. In spite of the challenges, the job paid well. Annie received 3 raises over her career, making enough to support herself and still provide her mother with $10 a month, which is the equivalent of almost $400 today, to care for her younger sister still at home. This was a substantial amount for a teenage girl to earn in those days. Annie worked at Woods Cross until she married a Denver and Rio Grande railway surveyor in June of 1884. Many of these women kept their telegraph keys after her resignation and practiced with them for the rest of their lives in spite of never returning to the railroad. In 1942, Elizabeth Cowley, then 85 years old, was invited by the Union Pacific station agent in Farmington to send a telegram to the Salt Lake City agency, in which she stated, "I entered the service as a telegraph operator when 16 years of age at Farmington, Utah, then quit to get married. I have kept up with telegraphy by using a set in my home. I love it. I am nearing 86 years of age." Annie Layton received a similar opportunity in 1955, sending a telegram from Salt Lake City to Farmington. In 1881, Union Pacific had gained full control of both the Utah Central and Utah Southern railroads and merged the 2 companies, operating them as part of the Union Pacific system. As the women working in their stations resigned over time, they were replaced with men according to what was expected by the rest of the railroad industry, until they were only remembered as a quaint feature of early Utah. Their legacy, however, as some of the earliest women railroaders, remains strong.